All right, if you could take your seats, and thank you for attending. We're going to hear Paul and Warren from Cisco Talos talk to us about Olympic Destroyer. Take it away, guys.
Hi guys, thanks all for coming. So we actually changed the title a little bit. Our title was originally Who Wasn't Responsible for Olympic Destroyer. We will very much cover that. But we also just realized that attribution is a complete circus. So we're going to go through some of the naiveties that exist and some of the complications that come up with it. So Paul's going to do half and I'm going to do half, and we'll flick through. So obligatory, who am I? I'm a security researcher with Cisco Talos. Paul and I work together on lots of interesting different APT stuff for the last 3 or 4 years. I like looking at malware and finding it, like pretty much everyone in this room. My background is network engineering, moved into malware analysis, threat intelligence, and if anyone ever wants to attend, I'm co-founder of B-Sides Belfast, so I'd be very happy if you wanted to chat and talk about that. And I'll hand it over to Paul.
It works, yes.
It works fine.
So my name is Paul. As you can hear, I'm French. But like the previous speaker said to me 2 hours ago, for my English, it's not my fault, it's because I'm French. So yeah, I'm a malware analyst and threat researcher at Cisco Talos. So basically, I work on a lot of different APT-related stuff. Don't go at B-Sides Belfast. Go at BotConf, the conference I organize, of course, because Ireland is shitty. It rains all the time, etc.
It's not a lie. It's not a lie.
So yeah, come in France. The food are better, of course. And we have wine, not Guinness. Yeah, everything is better.
We have Guinness. Guinness is our thing. You can't claim Guinness.
Yeah, so more seriously, we are here to speak about Olympic Destroyer. So everything started by this article for me. I read it on Sunday, I think, something like that. And it looks, when I read it, it looks something interesting. So I started to work on the Yara stuff to maybe find it if I was lucky. I will explain you why I was lucky and how powerful we are. And just to have an idea of the real impact about this case is during the ceremony, the opening ceremony, website was unavailable. Ticket system were down, so people were not able to print ticket to go inside of Olympic game. And the Wi-Fi was unavailable on some part of the organization, and it was down during few hours. So it could be worse, because finally everything worked and the ceremony was here, it was streamed everywhere on the world, etc. But there is a real impact on this case on local people in South Korea. So here, I don't even know why we translate it. I think everybody is able to read. But it's text from incident response team manager on this incident, and 50 internal server was impacted by this malware. So included Active Directory and database servers, so sensitive server, as you can imagine. And Olympic game organization has around 300 servers. So it's not all the servers, but it's a large part anyway. So how works the malware? It's very similar from architecture point of view than what we saw in the past, like WannaCry, NotPetya, etc. So you have the malware that scan your internal network. He used legitimate protocol used by every system administrator in the world, like PSExec, WMI, ready, standard, normal here, provided by Microsoft, and try to propagate inside of the network. So it's not magic. You cannot go from a machine to another machine without any credential and stuff like that. So the malware needs to have some information. He used several tricks to get this information. The first one, he implemented a browser stealer. So every username and password are coded on the browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, was exfiltrated, was collected by the malware, and this he created a dictionary of password and tried propagation with this password. Because as you know, everybody uses the same password everywhere, so that's why he browser password. Another way to get password on system, it's to steal system password, credential hash. So to do that, the malware use Mimikatz. It's a very famous open source tool to perform pass the hash, so to get hash from memory and to jump on another machine. And he simply repackage Mimikatz and use it like that to get stored password on the system. Once he get all this password, he create a dictionary, a list, and patch himself, he patch the malware, add this credential, and this copy was sent to the next server, executed, and the same thing was performed. New password was added on the list, and etc. So more the malware is executed, more you have hard-coded password inside of the binary. Finally, the main goal of what we name Olympic Destroyer is to destroy the machine. I will describe you exactly the different steps for destruction. And yeah, here is a screenshot of password stealer. So basically here, the browsers use a SQLite database. He simply performed query to get password. And everything was sent by a named pipe to the main module. Here is the Mimikatz code. So basically, it's how it formats a credential. And here is on the binary I analyzed first the hard-coded password. So first, when I opened the document, I thought the binary, I thought the attacker already had some password, but in fact, it's password stolen from a previous execution. So it was executed on the first machine, and the sample I had access was not the first initial one, but another one. If you check on VT, for example, you can have sample with the Killa Boom Boom, so the host name of the VT sandbox, inside of the binary. So I think there is a kind of infinite loop. So you send sample to VT, VT executed in sandbox, generate a new binary with VT credential. This one is sent to VT, which is executed in sandbox. So I think it costs some resource to VT to handle this sample. And yeah, if you want breaking news and something we don't disclose on our publication, how I detect this malware, my Yara rule was Pyeongchang. So
the simplest Yara rule we've ever written.
Yeah, so during Olympic game, I created a Yara rule with Pyeongchang because why not? And luckily, the domain, the real domain of Olympic game organizer is Pyeongchang 2018. So that's how I found it. Here is like a little bit like the previous speaker said, the malware destroy shadow copy. So snapshots performed by Windows are destroyed, and he destroyed backup on the system. And something very interesting, it does not wipe the local file, but he wipe file on share folder. So not local stuff, but if you map a file on your server or laptop, maybe, he will destroy the file on this share folder. Basically on company, every important file are not stored locally. You can lose your laptop, it can be stolen, whatever, they don't care. Everything is put on a share. And in this case, the malware target share. So it's very common for wiper. He destroy boot recovery. And as on previous case, he destroy event log. So the same thing is to annoy forensic investigation. Another stuff, this one is less common. The malware lists every Windows services and switch off each services one after one, etc. So basically, your system cannot boot anymore if all your services are disabled.
So this is where it got really quite funny for us. We obviously published a lot of information on Olympic Destroyer at the time. Obviously, what came out of that, similar to what Juan was talking about earlier, researchers will continue concepts and ideas that have been published and other information to find out more information, which is cool. So this is sort of what happened after we published about Olympic Destroyer. Kaspersky came out with a great report, Semantic came out with an interesting report about other elements. And we started to look at it a bit more, and this is where we came up with who was responsible for Olympic Destroyer portion. So the media circus started like this. Definitely North Korea. Actually, no, it wasn't North Korea. It definitely wasn't North Korea. It was definitely China. And then it went from China to Russia. So we just named 3 nation states just for the fun of it in the media. Keen to note that we didn't point out or name any nation states or attribute this to anyone at the time. But this is how it sort of started for us. So when you see different reports coming out from different companies, different vendors, and different researchers, you start looking back to try and understand, well, did we miss something, or what further information can we ascertain? And this is where we started to look at the links that were being talked about. So Lazarus Group, magnificently discussed by lots of people all the time. One of the overlaps that we started to see was some of the Blue North malware used by Lazarus Group for some of the Swift infrastructure bank heists. And that was a very, very simple one. So again, when we're trying to do attribution, I mean, Juan's talk was brilliant, and the whole idea here is attribution never lets us win. We don't ever win because we can't generally do anything about it as a research organization, as a vendor, as a company, etc. Law enforcement are the people who need to win, and that's ultimately the people we need to try and engage, liaise with, etc. Back to the main talk. So EVT-CHK was a string that existed in the Blue North Group malware samples. I think it was evtchk.bat.text, and I think they similarly used the .text input. So a small link, but one that maybe points out this could be something related similarly using file name patterns, because it's something that exists. Attackers continue to be lazy. The same wiper code. So when you wiped the first 1,000 bytes of the largest files identified, it didn't wipe everything. Like some of the malware that Sahir discussed was about wiping whole files, whole infrastructures, whole systems. Olympic Destroyer, from a local perspective, was trying to wipe out small sets of files. The reason for this is speed. If I can wipe things quickly, I can move on to the next file quickly, et cetera, et cetera. So these are some of the responsibilities that lied with it that we started to overlap. And then Kaspersky came out with a great report. So Costin's team at Great started looking at rich header information. Now, we look at malware all the time. How many people honestly ever looked at rich header stuff? So like
Except
4 people.
Costin.
Except Costin, because he doesn't count for this purpose. So like one other guy. It's not something that I generally do. I don't think it's something you generally do. Generally, you get the header to make sure it's a readable file type. If it's not, is it corrupted? Has it been tampered with? Is it sabotaged? Can you fix it, etc.? But no, the guys at Kaspersky quite rightly pointed out that the 2 rich, I don't have a pointer, sorry, the 2 overlapping code bases that exist here within them are pretty much all of the rich text header. Now the problem with rich text header is very, very undocumented, which again is why maybe not a lot of people look at it. But what Kaspersky had discovered is on the left, we see the Blue North sample associated with Lazarus Group, and on the right, the Olympic Destroyer sample that we published about. Right down until the last like 4 bytes, it's completely identical. That's not something that happens by accident. It just is not an accidental outcome of compilation. When you actually start to look at it in the code, which again Kaspersky did, they identified that whenever you decode the information related to the rich text header, you actually start to understand what it was compiled by. So the Blue North sample, as you see on the left, and the Olympic Destroyer sample on the right, would suggest they were identified and compiled by Visual Studio 2003, which you see the VC6 element. But in actuality, it's an x64-bit compiled platform that was compiled in Visual Studio 2010. So what's all that? What's the point of all that? What's the point of discussing rich text format? Well, it was completely copy-pasted, and it was a complete fabricated header. There was nothing real about it from a compilation perspective. That rings alarm bells for me straight away and shoot all around the world. So that's our first sort of interpretation of multiple false flags that existed within Olympic Destroyer. And then we moved on to some output from Inser Labs, who I think are about here this week. So Inser Labs write a very nice code similarity platform. And Inser Labs published some information about the code sharing that existed. So APT3 PairPy and APT10 menu pass. Well, they also wanted to get in on this party of Olympic Destroyer because they also had code overlap that existed. So the similarities that we were able to identify were credential stealers. So this was open source code, which could mean it was or it wasn't a false flag. They could have been an actor who reused the same open source code. They alternatively could have been an actor who deliberately put that in. There are multiple outcomes that can exist there. And then similarities in the AES function in APT10. One thing to point out about the APT10 link, that is the only time that's been identified. So maybe it forms a stronger link that this could be a relation to APT10, but then why can't it be related to APT3, and why can't it be related to Lazarus group? So we start to see this combination of false flag buildup happen. And then we've seen what we dubbed NotPetya. We had the same propagation technique, PSExec WMI using mimikatz, that became very, very prevalent in samples and attacks that we've seen over the last 18 months. We've seen WMI used multiple attacks to have the worm and propagation technique to allow you to go from box A to box B to box C. Again, as Juan mentioned, automated operations have become very important for these type of scale attacks. You can't just drop a box and wait for a remote user to access it and then carry on moving around, living off the land on that infrastructure. When you've got automated operations like this, you need code that can go off and do that, and this is where worm propagation type code comes in. Same way to transfer stolen credentials to the main name pipe, so again, mimikatz. If anyone has ever looked at mimikatz, you'll see that the proof of concept code is out there, the full code is on GitHub, it's open source, anyone can use it, i.e. any actor can use it, any good guy can use it, which is used very heavily for red team, and any bad guy can use it, which we see very heavily in the last 18 months. EternalRomance is where it got really, really interesting for us. So Paul and I worked on Olympic Destroyer quite a lot for maybe 2 or 3 days and did all the things we needed to do to publish the information. And then a couple of slides later, I'll talk about some attribution that came out from Microsoft related to EternalRomance. So that made us sort of revisit that, because when we were looking at it, we didn't see any evidence of EternalRomance. So the best way to see EternalRomance is during dynamic analysis, where it will attempt to open up SMB ports and it will attempt to try and spread, propagate, exploit, etc. That just didn't happen in Olympic Destroyer. However, when you actually look at the code base, you see the 4 structures that relate to EternalRomance being in there. So they actually are they actually are input in the code, but they're never actually used anywhere. And you see this, so this is the proof of concept code for EternalRomance. Those 4 structures existed within Olympic Destroyer. If you go and grab the Olympic Destroyer sample, you'll see all this code in there, just never used, never referenced, never called as a function, never used anywhere along. So how we got to that was basically Windows Defender sent a tweet out February 13th and said, fresh analysis of this has led to EternalRomance being used, and we were like,
yeah, at this time I was really pissed, because I said, shit, I missed something big, and I started to understand why I failed, basically, and where is the code of EternalRomance. And trust me, it's really time consuming to look for something that does not exist.
You cannot prove a negative. That is the most important lesson I think that Paul and I learned from this. You cannot prove a negative. So our boss was like, where's the EternalRomance side of it? There is none. Well, that can't be right. Microsoft have said it, and that's great. Microsoft do some awesome research. We got in touch with Microsoft and started to discuss, how do we get to this point of play? What has led you to say this, because we don't agree with you? And that wasn't about public slander or slinging anybody under a bus or anything like that. It was simply, Paul and I thought we had done something wrong. Paul was about to seg fault and jump out the window, so we needed to stop that from happening and understand what was wrong. So how we believe that Microsoft came to this conclusion was, if you Google some of the code that exists within the structures that relate to EternalRomance, the very first hit that you see is MS1710, which is the EternalRomance platform. So that's the code available on GitHub. We think what has happened is someone has been analyzing, and as we all do, you either Google in Windows APIs on MSDN, or you're Googling random stuff like this to try and make complicated tracks come together. We believe they've maybe Googled this information from the structure and came to the point where they've got basically the exploit, the Python script that existed for this, and they figured, okay, this is what's happening. So as I say, we got in touch with them, we discussed what the actuality of this was, and then 12 hours later, they put out a tweet to say, actually, that didn't happen. So Paul and I were very happy, and our boss was very happy, because he then believed that we were good at our job and we were actually doing things right. Paul no longer seg-faulted, and we had a happy life ever after. And then we ended up here. So we obviously continued to look at it as well to see what was going on, and some of the comparisons that we came to that I've discussed really briefly are what existed between Olympic Destroyer, NotPetya, and Bad Rabbit. So we've seen similarities in propagation techniques, we've seen similarities in exploits used. However, as I just discussed, EternalRomance was not used in Olympic Destroyer. But when you've got pieces of code base that relate to it, that exist within your code, it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that it is used, which is what we've seen happen. We've seen Mimikatz used. We've seen credentials being passed back and forth with Mimikatz. We've seen some files encrypted. We've seen some files deleted. We've seen some machines destroyed. So we get to the point in time where we have small linking similarities that exist between these multiple campaigns over the last 18 months. And what that all sort of boils down to is we believe this author purposely planted false flags. We went through Lazarus Group overlaps, we went through APT3 and APT10 overlaps, and then we went through EternalRomance overlaps. That doesn't happen by accident. Possibly one happens by accident, where you have code overlap, you've maybe copy and pasted something, like the EternalRomance stuff. That could very quickly cause a similarity engine to freak out because it sees all this information related to this sample, but also in this sample. So open source related platforms are where that can happen, i.e. Mimikatz. But we believe it was purposely included false flag information. What's the point of that? Well, it could be taken to the extreme of a country denying an attack on third-party false attribution. Again, the biggest issue with attribution is we, as security researchers, lack that overarching piece of information that exists only under law enforcement. So we can't write indictments, we can't write warrants, we can't smash down doors and take servers. It'd be really nice if all of us could do that, because I'm sure we'd be very successful in doing that and we would have great fun doing it, but we just don't have the capability to do that. What we have the capability to do is look at technical implementations of code. We look at how binaries operate, we look at how they work, we look at the codes that are used along the way, and we try and make I don't want to say derisory, but we try and make an attempt at attribution at times, but we just don't have the tools. And I don't want to say skill set, because I think some of us do have the skill sets for it. I don't think that's a skill set that's missing in this industry. I just think we don't have the necessary tools to do it. But it could really go from the extreme of the press saying it was North Korea, the press saying it was China, and the press saying it was Russia, to this being said, well, we think it was them because of this code overlap. The point of that ramble is basically, don't take for granted what you read in a piece of code, because it's not always right. Olympic Destroyer specifically had real potential to do a lot more damage. We don't really know why, but they had the potential to wipe that whole infrastructure and wipe that whole investment that had been in for the Pyeongchang Olympics. They could have wiped out all 300 servers. They didn't. We don't really know why. We could toss a coin and we could make assumptions as to why. Destructive malware will continue to be popular. Who's bored of cryptojacking? I know I am. Yeah. Who's bored of Bitcoin miners? I know I am. So this gives us something a bit more fun to look at, because we need to try and catch it quickly, because we need to stop machines being impacted and we need to stop stuff being taken down, essentially. Advanced threat actors will continue to evolve. They'll continue to copy each other, whether or not that's in vain, i.e. to frame each other, or whether it's because they think someone else has better code than them. Again, it's some life lesson that we'll never really know. The point of this is basically, don't look at code, don't assume it's right, and don't assume because it exists in one platform that it's correct in another platform. And the circus is now closed. Today is your last day to clown around with Paul and I. So yeah.